you need to be able to take an agenda and absolutely deploy with aggression, at speed. If I am not customer obsessed, I don't know what I would be, right? Like in order to stay in the game, that is just the mentality.
This is the founder of Ned, David Silverstein, formerly the press secretary for Majority Leader Harry Reid and chief of staff at MediaLink. David is now diving into the world of fintech as a first-time entrepreneur. We delved into his journey, exploring why he chose to become a founder and what drives his success as a generalist across a variety of fields throughout his career.
Thanks for having me.
David, it's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Your background is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. We love to start by telling people about who the entrepreneur is, or rather, who the entrepreneur was before they started their business. Who were you when you were the,
chief of staff, press secretary?
Where do you want me to begin?
So let's start with press secretary
Sure.
to Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. Rest in peace.
Yeah, certainly. I'll start by saying that particular experience was the greatest learning I ever could have asked for at that stage in my life. I think it had basically set me up to kind of take on certain types of challenges since then, and opportunities with a philosophy on how to view the world. It was rare, and not a day goes by that I don't think about that time in my life. But I guess to your question on like who was I was young, right? I think the open secret about government is it's run by young people. And I had found myself in that role in my mid-20s. I had a couple years out of school, but really, I was yet to be either molded. I lacked certain experience. I had certain skills for sure that I was able to bring to the table. But in hindsight, I was kind of like this tabula rasa, and that was a formative experience that helped a person like me start filling in the blanks. What did I believe in? How did I want to conduct myself, with my peers? Like, what was my agenda or outlook on the world? What was my work ethic even? And so I would say I can't put myself in the 26-year-old version of myself, those shoes again, but I can say like what I was not, right? Which was formed. And I think like, at least even today, and certainly like we're always learning. I'm 37 now. It's more than a decade later. Every work experience is a new learning opportunity. That was the first big one for me.
I too was an unformed mid-20s person assisting with big decisions on Capitol Hill, and I second that completely. And shout out to all the individuals assisting in the running of the federal government right now. No matter what side you're on, it's a fascinating role, and everybody's learning a lot, and we're all getting there together.
Sure.
I became a big fan of Senator Reid when I heard about him through reading President Obama's book, A Promised Land. And he comes out as a hero, in that book, comes off as a hero. Is there any just like a singular Senator Reid-ism that you can share with the audience that's maybe helpful?
Yeah, I think there's hundreds. And look, I'll put my own experience in perspective. I was there for a few years, and I think even if you could work in that environment for one day and you could be an active listener, you could take home more learning pound for pound than many other types of kind of work environments or team environments. But I think the one thing that differentiated that office and Senator Reid himself was kind of a coda, a philosophy of waging what the office called a good fight. It's actually the name of, I think, his own book. But I think, at the end of the day, his life experience was really built on fighting for others that typically could not speak up for themselves, fight for themselves. And it was an absolute battle cry that every single staff member, from the most junior young folks in the office, which frankly, like I was part of that. Like I was a younger staff member in that office to those that were most senior. Like we were taking on a good fight. Like what we were doing had a particular purpose. Like, and we were doing it aggressively. It was a formed opinion on like why we came to work each and every day. And so I think like, there's not one anecdote, there's not one ism. I think every memory that I have working in that office is a cherished one. But I think at the end of the day, like if I look back on those years, I can say like, I took on a good fight for a short period of time, and I'm trying even now in my own day to day, like how can I bring that forward for myself, right? How can I make that unique to, my career today? Because, it focuses you.
And so you then took that good fight to the hollowed halls of 40 West 4th Street by getting your MBA at NYU Stern.
Sure.
Could you tell us about what was the decision like to choose to get an MBA? There may be people in the audience that are considering applying or like getting into the MBA application process right now.
I would say I was unique in that I was coming from government. And so I kind of like missed this memo on what students or what folks go to get that graduate degree for, and like what they were really hoping for. I came into NYU Stern with a purpose. I wanted to learn how to run businesses. I wanted to learn and understand how to really operate like growing businesses. It was something that drove me. It was the reason why I applied. It was what I wanted to dedicate my broader life to. And I realized from the vantage point of being a Senate staffer, like I lacked certain skills.
Mm-hmm.
I did not come with a business background. I think pound for pound when I got there, I was head below shoulders others, right, who came out of, financial services industry or who were coming out of, different types of private sector backgrounds. And so, for me, it was just this rare moment to take a step back and like really learn, like from drinking from a fire hose and to try to figure out like where I fit afterwards. It's a two-year program. And I think I went into it with a point of view that I wanted to figure out what I did not want to do. Mm-hmm. I think there was a lot of focus on like figure out what you want to do next. I was coming out of government. I wanted to, take some space and say, okay, like I can dedicate the next couple decades to these experiences. Like, let's start checking things off the list rather than creating a list of things that could be interesting. So that's kind of how I approached the MBA experience altogether. It was a great experience.
Okay, so how did you pinpoint, process of elimination to media? You eventually went into the process in the media industry and eventually into MediaLink as chief of staff to, one of the biggest media companies out there. Can you explain how you decided?
Yeah, I think it's the reality in any kind of job pursuit or career pursuit. It's a matter of who wants you. It's not like I had like a bevy of options ahead of me. I took time in those 2 years to meet people. I took time to find mentors. I was very lucky to find people over the course of 2 years that helped shape an opinion. And when I was coming out of graduate school, there were a couple of options. I wasn't like replete with so many things that I was swatting away. Like I needed to get a job, right? And so I think when I was looking at what I could do, at the time it was like 2015. And so a lot of change was happening in the digital media industry at that point. And I think whether you're going into media or any other sector, it could be manufacturing, it could be anything. I think the question that I asked myself, which I've continued to kind of apply in certain scenarios, is like, is this direction, a direction that is growing, right? Is this industry that I'm heading into a growth industry? And at the time, media was transforming. It was dynamic. There was, wild, fundamental transformation around digital video at the time. And so I went to go work, in the digital media world, running different, types of digital media or content operations. And, that to me felt like, a route where I could, very very clearly like learn and hone operating skills, but also be part of something that was taking shape and to be kind of within that ecosystem as that was all happening. So that was kind of the way I found myself in that direction, but it wasn't like, there was a formula and there was, a series of options. It was chaos, right? And you got to make the right decision in the right moment for yourself. And I shipped off to LA after graduation.
Coming out of school, I feel like it's always chaos.
Yeah,
even if you have something that's so defined, as a role that you're getting into, it's going to be chaotic at the very least in your own head. And I think recognizing that is super important. Could you walk us through, though, what is a chief of staff? We're seeing chief of staff, pop up in a variety of connotations these days, especially in tech and actually in startups as well.
Yeah. I think it can mean whatever the CEO needs it to mean. and it takes on, as I've seen in the technology world, a couple of different forms. I'll put the word or the title of chief of staff in perspective. I came out of the U.S. Senate where the chief of staff, it was a mix, a hybrid of kind of lead advisor or counsel plus chief operator plus chief decision maker. It was such a complex dynamic role, and it really was a driving force. The idea of being a chief of staff at the end of the day, whoever you work for, is that you are a force accelerator for the principal, right? Like, you need to be able to take an agenda and absolutely deploy with aggression at speed, and make sure you're doing it with like a level of like strategic like thoughtfulness, right? And so whether it's in government or in technology, the person who occupies that role needs to move really quick and know how to get an agenda over a line, right? On behalf of that C-suite, on behalf of the person, that they have the pleasure of serving for. So, I think when it comes to the private sector, it's definitely a title that you see kind of popping up. I've seen certain companies where like the chief of staff is truly an empowered operator. I've seen certain companies where it's like, a role that they throw at, a young person that's coming out of college, and it's more administrative. And so it really just comes down to like what the CEO needs and what level of power they are willing to imbue in that person to get their agenda over the line, right? Whether it's internal, like internal operations, or external, if it's an externally facing role, whether it's business development or otherwise.
So if you see a chief of staff role, I would say that you should do your research on what the CEO is looking for. Listen to what David just had to say. The chief of staff role is still very young, especially in the startup world. I think it's important to kind of figure that out first, because you don't really want to get yourself into a job, especially in early career, where you're not doing what you want to be doing.
Yeah, and also conversely, there's an opportunity to form the role that it is you want. And so because it is a title that has a lot of latitude for the right person, and within the right type of entity, there's kind of this unheard of level of freedom that you could get in that role that you otherwise might not find in any other operating role. And so, I would say, like, depending on the person and what their career goals might be, first, you're working for somebody. It's not just you're working for the company. If you're the chief of staff, you're, really working beside an individual day in and day out. And so first things first, like, make sure you really want to work for that person. Make sure you could learn from that person. Make sure they're, principled and values driven. And that's chief among the chief of staff, at least for me. And that's what I got from my role or my experience. But I think the other thing is, like, it for the right person in the right entity, make of it what you will, right? You can come in there and really craft that position if you do it right. And like, that means unmitigated amount of learning, unmitigated amount of operating experience at potentially a young age. Like, it's awesome, for if it's done correctly, I think.
Okay. So your story from government to MBA to MediaLink, and what made you switch, to pivot to starting Ned? Let's talk about Ned.
Yeah, I think I hesitate to say that I am like a founder that, really is, with that classic entrepreneurial spirit. I'm actually quite risk averse. And so, not surprising, like, I was 34 when I started Ned. And so I already had like 13 plus years of work experience. I think, on the face of it, when you look at founders, they kind of fall into two categories. They're either really young or they come a little bit, with a few more years behind, their resume. And, I did not feel up until the time that I started Ned that I was ready. And frankly, it was just the timing of the pandemic that really forced me to make that decision for myself. Wow. And so, I had been working at MediaLink. I had been concepting what has become Ned now for some time, very loosely. But I think when the pandemic hit in 2021, it was, for me, a personal wake-up call that things could change. They were changing around me drastically, and that if there was ever a moment that I would set out not to build a business, it was more to have my own agenda of how I wanted to take on the world or work on certain types of things. I didn't know what Ned was until until Ned really formed, but it really pushed me, frankly, to just focus on kind of taking time. That was the first step. And in order to do that, I had to leave, the job that I was in at that time and take a step back and really, view the world in a different way. I needed space and some time to do that. And I think within the pandemic, it was chaos.
Yep.
And so, the question that I think in hindsight, I'll put words to it now. I didn't ask this then, but I felt if there was ever a moment for me as a risk-averse individual to start something, then this would be that moment because, if it failed, it failed. And I could, find something else and move on very quickly amidst what is otherwise a market correction moment for the global economy. And what happened was it put me on a very specific path. But I think, it wasn't a journey. It was a decision to take a beat amidst what was otherwise a really trying time. And to think about what my place in the world was while so much change was really occurring at that moment.
I think making the decision to take the leap to work on your business, no matter at what point it is in history, is a spiritual decision.
Totally.
But during that period of time, everything got magnified, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, you could not think about the day-to-day in the way that you were thinking about your day-to-day at some points, even just a couple weeks earlier at the very beginning of it. And so, that replacement, that mental rewiring that we all went through in the pandemic, I feel like is so important. And we're seeing that as a theme. It's the concept of the pandemic as an opportunity. And it doesn't really seem like that's what should have happened. But a lot of people's brains just had to go through that. And, a lot of terrible things happened. And then a lot of, opportunities opened up. So that's the concept that, I don't think any of us really saw coming.
For sure.
I would like to just take a step back, though, and think about, what is Ned?
Yeah, sure.
So let's just get into what Ned does.
Sure. Ned is an operating system for small business lenders. We provide an end-to-end infrastructure so a small business lender can qualify more borrowers and, really grow their loan books. And what that basically means is we give them the technology that they require to deploy more capital, right? I think when we set out to build Ned, we didn't know what the technology needed to be. But I think when we got to market, it was pretty clear that the customers that we now work with asked us for technology that would allow them to do two new types of activities. The first was that they wanted infrastructure that would allow for them to design and offer their customers, the small business owner, different types of financial products, which seems like simple enough. But when you take a step back, the small business loan as a capital product hadn't really changed very much in hundreds of years. And small business lenders wanted to kind of break the mold. They wanted to offer different types of terms or structures to small business borrowers that needed money in different ways for different things. Their technology could not power what it was that they wanted to offer. And the second thing that they wanted to be able to underwrite business owners using cash flow rather than credit or collateral. And I think, when you look at the last 50 years of lending technology, it's kind of like a form follows function scenario. Not a lot of innovation on the capital product of the small business loan. And so a lot of technology has been built to power that capital product. And so these lenders wanted to do new things. They wanted to offer new products and that they needed new technology to do that. And so, Ned over time, started, really as a solution that extended outward to become an end-to-end platform. From a product perspective, think of Ned as really the white label software that a borrower would do everything on from the moment that they apply for a revenue-based loan. We focus on cash flow lending to the moment that they provide their last repayment back to the lender. We've really built out that end-to-end component. And we've tried to build out, a suite of capabilities for lenders to really centralize all their activities from start to finish as well.
And what was that kind of initial customer acquisition process like?
Total accident is what it was. It was all chaos. But yeah, but I think the customer acquisition experience was accidental in the best way possible. We started not out as a B2B, a classic kind of B2B business. We actually started out more consumer facing. The very first version of Ned, now 2.5+ years ago, was really, it's same technology, but it was really built to serve a small business owner directly. And the original observation that we built Ned with was that small business owners had really hard time securing financing. A lot of them were going, without the capital they needed to grow. They were asking those in their personal network, a friend, a family member, for pretty big sums of money. And Ned really was that platform that helped them manage like a friends and family kind of working capital loan. And we chose revenue-based financing as like the underpinning. So, the original platform helped a business owner verify their revenue, structure an agreement, automate revenue sharing, revenue-based repayments. And so to your point, like how did that lead to our first customer acquisition? The moment we really started kind of powering our first, very earliest transactions on the platform, small business lenders saw us accidentally. We were doing like message testing, and our first customers were, email outreach, testing messages, and they actually got back to us and they said, "We'd love to see that.
Wow.
We'd like to take a look at that because we want to offer like a revenue-based capital product to our customers. We can't do that yet." And once I got in front of them and I showed them at that time the first version of the platform, they're like, "Can we use that as an operating system?"
Wow.
And so from a customer acquisition standpoint, we fell into it. And we're very lucky. I think the challenge was more around listening to what the market was telling us at that time, because it kept happening. Like we kept getting in front of these capital providers like, "That's pretty cool. We can't do that." We inadvertently built like a lending rail. And so we pivoted pretty aggressively more than 2 years ago now, and have been working with small business lenders ever since.
I mean, pro tip for anyone starting your business: if you hear something from your customers repeatedly,
Totally,
you should at the very least consider it. If maybe not, pivot your entire business around it, but you should at the very least consider it and test it out. And email marketing to start is such a great way of just getting your initial kind of thoughts out there. And it doesn't have to be, hey, here's a free trial of, Ned V1 or a free trial of a real MVP. It could also be, what problems are you seeing right now? That's also what those initial email marketing messages could say.
And for us, like we originally, started doing very light email marketing, and by no means was this like a grandiose kind of like rollout. We just wanted to see like what the open rates would be like on certain messages.
Right.
It was very table stakes, very simple and straightforward. Were we revenue-based financing software? Were we like something else? Like what we needed to see how the market wanted to define us. And ultimately, I think the outcome of what was otherwise like, what I thought at the time was a fairly tactical set of activities, to get from one point to the next, was actually a fairly cataclysmic realignment of everything we were building, stood for. We really shifted gears after that.
And you did a great job of actually listening to the customers, though.
It was hard. It was very hard. I think when you work on something at that time for probably more than 10 months, it's hard to like put anything down. And, it was challenging because you don't know if you're going to survive a pivot. I didn't know if I would survive a pivot. We had very little funding at that time. We needed to figure out, how to focus ourselves. And so it's like, it's either you pivot and thrive and you build, the mammoth business that you believe it can be, or you absolutely flame out. And so I think like in that moment, like, yeah, it's easy to say now we were really good active listeners. That is core to what we do today. But, it was kind of like I was in shock for a moment, and I had to like really gather myself. And I was very grateful to have a co-founder as well as an investor at the time that kind of shook me out of it and said, this is where we're going. Like, this is absolutely where we need to go. And so, we didn't look back. Like we went forward, and did so aggressively.
So revenue-based lending, can you possibly explain it to the audiences? What is that like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the basic concept is that instead of a business owner paying back a lender a fixed amount of principal and interest every month, they're able to pay back a percentage of their revenue. And what that allows for a business owner to do is to, really benefit from more flexible repayment terms. And so if they do really well one month, they're going to pay a little bit more money. If they, don't do as well, or they have a down quarter, then their repayments will be a little bit less. And so that does a couple of things. First of all, it allows the lender to underwrite in a different way. And so lenders are constantly figuring out a way, like different ways to qualify borrowers. There's, demand for capital. They have oftentimes pipelines of borrowers that they're trying to figure out how to say yes to. And it's increasingly difficult when, a business doesn't have credit, a business owner personally might not have credit, and they're asset light. They don't have collateral to put up, to get that financing. And so, I think revenue-based financing not only, is like literally a methodology from a repayment perspective, but it also allows the lender to look at the borrower's business performance first and foremost. And typically, looking at cash flow, looking at business performance allows the lender to like underwrite really quickly. It's lower cost to them. They're able to qualify typically more borrowers. But I think the outcome of revenue-based financing is pretty much like, faster underwriting, faster repayments for both sides, right? For everybody involved in that experience.
And so what is your experience like, communicating, those value additions to your potential customers? Sales and marketing for fintech companies, I think the whole concept of what they're doing is really interesting broadly, of what you all are doing is very interesting broadly. With your name, Ned, it's a person, it's a human-centered approach, or at least that's the way I'm seeing it so far.
Yeah. I think, I'll start with the name. I mean, to my point before, we were originally trying to serve a small business owner directly. And so, that's a more consumer-driven business. And we felt that if we were going to, serve the small business owner as our core customer, then we needed to have a level of empathy and humanity around, the value propositions that we were providing. And when we pivoted to work with lenders directly, we didn't change the name. And I think what I can say now, it's actually been a real differentiator for us in the long run. There's not a conversation that doesn't start with like, who's Ned? What's Ned? Why Ned? But I do think the reasoning behind naming it Ned has been undeterred, which is there needs to be more humanity in small business lending. We are the facilitator between a lender and a borrower. And that is a really intimate place to be when money is being transferred between, those two entities and when it's being facilitated back to the lender. And so, we need to be as human as the stakeholders that are already part of that relationship. And I think just by having that name to start with, it actually kind of creates, a circumstance where we have permission to be there. We of course have to earn that, over time with great technology and product. But, I think it certainly contrast to our competitors in the space that are, lending tech, like old school infrastructure with brands that, are more around what they do than who they do it for, right. I would say.
I would say that human-centered design is so important in fintech. And, if you think about the concept of money, when you're giving someone even access to your money, what do you need to do with them? You need to trust them. And who are you going to trust if not another human, right? That concept I think is going to revolutionize, the future of fintech, even for large banks. And I'm curious to see how it's going to, continue to develop over time.
I fully agree. I think the thing that I am always really, in awe of is the fact that, our customers are really using Ned. I would say the outcome is certainly lending money and driving repayments, but it's about relationship management at the end of the day. It's about deepening relationships between, a capital provider and those that they're financing and serving. And, what they're using Ned to do is really, deepen that relationship over long periods of time. These are sometimes, these are multi-year relationships. And so, I think at the end of the day, like the world of small business lending and just broadly, like, the capital markets, it is a relationship-driven ecosystem. And I think the technology that we're trying to build, like you said, it's human-centered from the start. Case in point, one of the most used features on our platform is simple messaging, correspondence.
Wow.
That was something that we're constantly surprised by. We build a lot of like heavy-duty features around underwriting or repayments, but just to have a central place to have a conversation in a safe way, that has been kind of this outsized value proposition, to the folks that use our platform. But I think to your point, it's about relationships and making sure that they have the ability to, correspond and share and, provide transparency to one another over, over the time that they're working with one another.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that people want to communicate with people, not software.
Yeah.
And a customer that's communicating with somebody else is going to be able to understand the software better. You're probably going to be able to develop, better solutions for them, and you'll probably be able to take the data from those conversations easier as well. So yeah, kudos on that.
Ned's Bespoke Financial Services. Can you possibly give us some transparency in terms of your business model, how you...
in terms of just like how our customers are designing new financial
products? How do you
products?
generate revenue and on your end?
I mean, for us, we're a SaaS platform, SaaS fees, right? Like this is like the playbook is very real. We're infrastructure, but I think like any software business, we have premium features. We allow our customers to scale. And so I think our pricing is very much in line with comps in the space who are providing kind of, SaaS on a monthly basis, annual basis, things like that.
So in the context of providing bespoke services, it feels like, though, you could very easily find yourself in almost like an agency model, though, like a tech agency model where you're just kind of creating services, then you're pushing it out, and you're maybe customizing it a bit too much. Personally, if I was an investor, that would maybe concern me a bit, right? Less recurring revenue, very specific, perhaps getting away from the mission of the company at times if you're doing too much for a client. How do you kind of, balance that?
Yeah, I think, it's a technology answer. We don't customize it in the way that we function as an agency or a development shop. We've built open architecture so the lenders themselves can configure the system as they need it. And so, there's an out-of-the-box Ned platform. You can take it as the customer, you can take it in thousands of different directions. And, I think, I always liken it to the fact of kind of flipping a wall of light switches on and off, right? And so we give the lender the ability to customize, in a way that's, rapid, that's nearly costless for them, and also gives them the platform that they need, right? And so, we're not taking requirements and building a bespoke platform for everybody. Ned's out of the box. Use it or don't use it. We give you the ability with open architecture to make it your own, and that's core to our strategy, right? I think what we heard from day one is every lender's different. They want their platform to be different, and we remain agnostic. Like we want to just give them the opportunity to configure it really quickly.
It's almost like putting a bakery together. I see this as like, okay, you're starting, you give the ingredients, right? And you're creating a reputation for yourself for utilizing, organic ingredients. And somebody could say, hey, I want this kind of cake or I want that kind of cake. And you say, sure, I'm providing you with those ingredients. And customizability, I think, is really interesting in the context of the future of fintech as well. As we're entering a space where more and more forms of technology are possible.
Sure.
Even the rise of artificial intelligence maybe being integrated into fintech. The future of fintech is of kind of a standardized fintech for everyone, I think, is questionable. I think it would follow a larger technological trend as well of people getting customized solutions in everything, really, from their financial services to even the social media they use. If the tech is there and it can address the specific need you have, why not design it for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if this is an answer to even a question you're asking, but I think just broadly in the space of just selling to enterprise, there's no business customer that is able to, at an enterprise level or even at a mid-cap level, able to just engage with a platform without some level of configuration, or if they can't have that configuration, they certainly want it. Every organization is different. They have different workflows. They have different working cultures, different team designs. And so, I think increasingly the goal of just enterprise software broadly is an ability to remain super flexible, and to provide that level of flexibility as a core value proposition at the end of the day.
One thing we're curious about, though, is team building aspect. You come from a not technical background in this field. How did you go about building your team out?
I was very lucky to meet my co-founder. His name is Mayur Motke. He's our chief product officer. We met in the middle of the pandemic, and he has really built an incredible platform from the first line of code to where we are now, and it's a robust solution now. But I think chief among being or trying to be self-aware is like I know I'm not a technologist in a classic sense. I am not an engineer, and so I needed to be able to partner with somebody that first, I think, spiritually can see the economy moving in the direction that I saw it moving in, but also, felt like they could work in such a way to build the infrastructure that the world requires. And I got that, really early on. I was so lucky. And so, but I would not be able to be where we are without my partner from those early days.
And what were those initial conversations like, though, as a non-technical person with a vision? Were you trying to communicate things in a way where you didn't even know what was possible? Or did you do a little bit of research before having those initial conversations?
So, I think I definitely took it as far as I could as a non-technical individual. I built the very first wireframes for what the company, they're not anything to brag
Still,
about.
That's great.
But I think you might not be technical, but I think one might not be technical, but I felt like there was a sequence of activities. I wanted to put it on a piece of paper, right? Just for myself. And so you could use, certain platforms like Miro or whatever today as a non-technical individual to bring, core concepts to life. Certainly it was lacking the nuance that our platform has now, but, I was able to have a macro discussion, in those early days, but also realize in not being technical, I did not know what questions to ask. And so fast forward 2 years, I would say I'm smart enough to be dangerous, but I'm still, not an engineer at all, but I do have a strong point of view on the product. But that's only after learning from my co-founder. I have been, I've benefited from working with somebody who is, an amazing technologist, and I've, been able to form my own opinion, but that took time. But I think to your point, in those early days when we first sat down, it was about vision first and conceptual at a macro scale. It was not about, what feature or widget or, function. I think what, if anything, the culture of our business that we've tried to build around is build step by step. Do not boil the ocean. And that's something that, our chief product officer drives home every single day. We have built very incrementally and only when the market told us to build, right? Only after we got feedback from our customers. And so frankly, everything I learned was from him or from the folks that, we get to work with from a customer standpoint.
Don't boil the ocean is such an important tactic to utilize when you're a young startup. The concept of trying to do too much is just, it's so attractive to try to do so much sometimes.
Well, I think for us, our timing was such where we just didn't have enough money to do too much. Boiling the ocean is a luxury. We in hindsight probably were stretching $1 twice or three times as far as the next startup. Mm-hmm. It was during a time, post in the middle of the pandemic. And so it was just, certainly a chaotic moment for the global economy, but then also most of the last 2 years has also been very difficult from a fundraising standpoint. And so for us, it was just discipline. Mm-hmm. And the outcome of that was really a product building culture that was really rooted in being customer centric. And that, customer centricity allowed us to frankly do more with less at the end of the day.
And your LinkedIn today still says that you're customer obsessed.
We are. I speak the truth. No, and I think that's been core to our business from day one. At the end of the day, we are here because of our customers. I get to wake up every day because, we have customers across the country that are using Ned and using our infrastructure to close loans. And so if I am not customer obsessed, I don't know what I would be, right? In order to stay in the game, that is just the mentality. And it's real. We work with awesome people. We got very lucky.
And I hope that you stay that way, David, because, over time, the role of a CEO changes. You could become investor obsessed, right? And, fundraising is not everything. And the one thing that's going to allow you to fundraise is your product.
Sure.
And the people that use your product are your customers. So I would really try to remain customer obsessed for as long as possible.
Speaking of fundraising, can you speak a little bit more about, as a first-time founder, what was that like?
Yeah, it was a first. I learned a ton. I think I worked for companies that were not startups prior to Ned. And so I think, everything from a business building perspective certainly has always been a first. But I think in context, or against the backdrop of fundraising, that was trial by fire in the most classic sense, in that it was also during a time of intense interest rate increases, inflation, the idea of raising money became a really daunting task in a different way over the course of the last year and a half. And so, I mean, for us, I had to learn as I went, and no different, frankly, than we're building the business. After 150 investor discussions, you are getting feedback in real time, and I think in the way that we take feedback and build our product, I also take what we're hearing from the conversations that we have with different venture investors, and it hones the way we talk about what we're doing and who we are.
In this industry with so many legacy players, what challenges have you encountered on your journey so far, and how did you navigate through those?
Yeah, from like a competitive standpoint.
Yes.
I mean, I think we found ourselves with a really differentiated wedge into our customer base. We are a cash flow lending strategy for our customers. When I look at the last generation plus of lending technology, it is very differently built. Like, it is built, to power a traditional loan product. It's built to power a credit-driven underwriting process. Where they zig, we zag a little bit. And so, I think we've gone very deep on cash flow lending or revenue-based financing capabilities, and that has opened doors as just a value proposition, as we've seen lenders want to move in that direction. And so, we don't kind of replace competitors in a classic sense. And so I think, like, where a lot of B2B businesses compete, it's always a question of like, what's your rip and replace cost? For us, we're an enablement solution. And so we are welcomed into lending operations. And then, we are that platform that they are doing growth activities with, or they're launching a new financial product with, but it's not like they're stopping what they're doing. And so I think, I would position Ned as like a strong complementer, certainly first and foremost, versus, an aggressive competitor that would replace or wedge out or elbow out, an incumbent. Certainly, my goal is to wedge them out over time, but I think, the way that we've designed our approach to the market is, help lenders do what's new to them. And if they're doing what's new, then they don't have to get rid of what they're using today. And so we sit beside our competitors, frankly, within the lending operations that we're active in.
Sit beside your competitors. I love that. So in looking beyond competitors and into the kind of financial industry as a whole, last year, the banking industry experienced a bit of a shock with the fall of Silicon Valley Bank, for example. How does this affect? How has this affected, and how will it continue to affect Ned's trajectory?
Yeah, I think there's no startup that the current economy, has not affected in one way or another, whether it's inflation creating, stress on supply chains or, or otherwise. I think for us, we work with non-banks mostly. Mm-hmm. And so, we were frankly very insulated from what was otherwise chaos within specifically the banking sector. Certainly there's runoff effects that we have, grappled with and challenges that we've taken on. But, for the most part, our customers have not deterred from, lending to their customers, the borrowers. And so, if anything, we've posted growth over the last year, certainly, probably in the last year plus doubled our customer base. Certainly, have driven incredible growth just from a platform usage perspective. But I think, that's all to say we remain wary just by default. And so, and that goes back to just starting Ned in the pandemic where, we did not know what would come next if there was another calamitous event that could create a shockwave. And so I think, right now interest rates are high, inflation is, coming down, but certainly not down. And, this might not air for a while, but hopefully by then it might come down even further. But, I think what that requires of us as the operators is just to double down on discipline, make sure we're finding customers that are, right for us in this moment in time, that we could build with, that we could build for. But, for us, I think the lending economy will have to persist, right? Mm-hmm. Capital needs to be deployed. It can't just be pent up. Yep. And so it's more a question of when and how fast versus if. And I think that's what we're trying to keep a pulse on right now.
I think more people should try to start businesses in spaces where, there's less of an if.
Yeah.
You think about when and how, and when you're making your strategic decisions rather than an if.
Absolutely. And, in the last 2 years alone, more small business, like the growth of new small businesses being opened in America, has taken off. And so I think, for us, demand for capital broadly is, a key ingredient into what goes into, success for our customers, right? They need pipeline. They're trying to provide capital to their customers. And so, I think altogether, yes, there will always be market externalities that will make things tough. If it's not interest or inflation, it's going to be something else. Right. And so I think, it's the challenge that the operators have to take on to be prepared and to be flexible and to roll with it at the end of the day.
Speaking about something else, the trends we see in terms of small business owners, according to, the Federal Reserve in 2021, 85% of small businesses are experiencing financial difficulty, but only 34 of those percent of the businesses apply for loans. Why do you see this trend happening?
I think there's a lot that goes into that. And, I think I think you're probably getting those facts from the Small Business Credit Survey, which we follow very, very closely. I think in the last 2 years since the pandemic, there's been dynamics that have shifted. And, the first thing is that rejection of small business applicants have increased, and they've kind of stayed at a heightened level. And so I think, over time, the number of applicants will typically, lessen or plateau at least, partially because they know that it's a tight credit environment and it's going to be really difficult to get money. But I think what we're finding is that small business owners, in kind of the Jurassic Park kind of way, like nature will always find a way. Small businesses always will need to find a way to grow. They will always need to find financing. And so, I think what might be occurring in those numbers is kind of also occurring elsewhere with different results, where small business owners are seeking capital in different ways from different types of capital providers, different types of financial products that are not necessarily being captured. I think the layer that we started with was that 46% of small business owners ask friends and family for financing, or ask a personal connection for working capital or capital. And so, I think the context of loan applications is always important to think, a small business owner is going to figure out a way forward. They might not go to a traditional lender to get structured capital, but it's going to come from somewhere. And so, I think altogether, like just the small business economy, still creating 2 of 3 net new jobs. More small businesses are opening this year over year, than they have been. And so with that, I think what might be a plateaued application outcome, it's definitely growing in different ways in some way, right? For capital providers that are either classic banks or not banks, or otherwise somewhere in between.
And we love to see small business growing.
Small
business is the lifeblood of this country. Entrepreneurship is what makes this whole engine move that we call our day-to-day life here.
Absolutely. I think, we built Ned for the small business owner from day one, and that has not changed. Right. I think, and I think what has been core is what you're just describing there, which is, to be a small business owner in America is, to be, vital day in, day out. And it's not in such a way that it's just, a good talking point. Regional economies depend on a small business owner. They have a job to do. And I think, when we've gotten to speak to small business owners, we hear that. Like, they know that they are creating jobs. They know that they are building, teams and bringing value to their communities or regions. And when you look at it at a macro scale, it all kind of rolls up into our own GDP, right? Like, our value on the global stage is driven by the 31 million small business owners that are operating across the United States that are, in one way or another, typically looking for capital at any given point. And so, in order for us to accelerate that growth, money, capital, access to capital that is a fit for today's economy is going to be just fundamental.
Fundamental, not just to the future of Ned, but to the future of society as a whole.
But that's the bet that we're making, right? Yeah. I think, right now we see, a tectonic market failure where more than 60% of small business applicants are getting rejected or are going underfinanced in some way. That's a market failure, but it's also, I think, an economic security risk, right? And so, we see, certainly, a meaningful opportunity to correct that and build a big business around that. But also, I think, like, we're making a bet that if we can help to kind of like release the levee of pent up capital, that's going to be, good for Ned, obviously good for our customers, the lenders, great for small businesses, but also, over time, more money flowing through this economy, we'll have the positive effects that we've always hoped for: more job creation, more growth at local, regional, state, domestic levels. Like that all hinges on whether a dollar can move from point A to point B and back to point A again, within the context of a small business loan.
Absolutely in accord. Unfortunately, we are running close to being our time.
Sure.
We would like to just ask, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs, especially ones like yourself, people that have had, maybe even 10 plus years in industry, perhaps even 20, that want to take that leap? What's like some baseline advice for those people?
Yeah, I think I'm never one to give advice.
We would love for you to share some, though. Clearly, you're very knowledgeable.
No, I think, nobody will ever know. A founder or an entrepreneur, a business owner that's starting a new business can never fully comprehend how hard it is until they do it.
Right.
And so I'll never say, try to really think hard and long about how difficult it will be. But I think be prepared for feelings that you will not have felt before, in terms of challenges, self-worth, feeling demoralized even when, you're rejected or things fail or don't work out in your favor. And when you compound those often, difficult negative feelings over what is oftentimes, long periods, right? It takes sometimes years to go from 0 to 1. Like, I think the question that I wish I could have asked myself again, and I probably would have said yes, but I wish I asked it to begin with, is like, is that something that you're really willing to endure? There's nothing fabulous or glamorous really about the job other than the personal satisfaction of building something that you believe in. That far outweighs the negative when you get to a point where you can kind of take a step back and say, wow, like we're really doing it. I always joke, like it's just in the last 4 to 6 months that I'm having a really, good time building. It was difficult, right? It was just, by far and away like the hardest thing I've done. And so I think for a future entrepreneur, knowing that you cannot quantify what it will feel like, are you ready? Right. And I wish I would have just taken a beat and say, all right, just gather yourself before this. Cause I really just jumped in and I did not take time. I did not take a moment really to kind of really prepare. And so I think, just creating a space, right, where you can kind of take a strong look at what you're about to head into and say, are you ready for that? Even if I don't know what's about to happen, that's probably where I would ask myself a different question before doing this. And I hope I only have to do this once at the end of the day.
And in terms of future outlook, where do you see the goals and milestones for Ned, maybe 5, 10, 20 years down the line?
Yeah, I mean, I want to be the central nervous system for the lending economy, right? I think we believe that lending in the United States needs a new set of rails. We're starting with small business. That is the first step we are taking. But we believe that our infrastructure has far wide-ranging applications across different types of credit markets. And so, when I think of where we need to be in order to be the size that I believe we can be, Ned needs to be able to provide infrastructure to the broad array of capital providers in America, whether it's bank, credit union, non-bank lenders, commercial credit providers, private credit. We need to be able to provide flexible and fluid infrastructure so they can, underwrite in the way that they need to underwrite and provide every type of financial product under the sun. We are a platform that focuses on cash flow underwriting and revenue-based lending today. That's step one. 10 years from now, we are, rails for what we believe is the future lending economy. And it's going to take a lot of work to get there, but that's where we intend to go.
And there's one more thing. If you had to change one thing about your journey, what would it be?
I wouldn't change anything. I don't know. I do believe everything happens for a reason. I think, the little things have compounded into the results of today, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent. But I do think that, when I took that first step, it required me to, not take a salary for a really long period of time. And I saved up a lot of money from the first, decade plus of, well, not a lot of money, but I saved up enough money to take, a chance on myself. And I think, what I would have changed up front, is just really giving that a little bit more thought, right? And realizing that it's okay to pay myself earlier, right? I probably went a little longer without, drawing a salary because it was tough economy, tough times, right? And so, but I think the sooner you can get to a point where, you are, building something that allows you to, to work and live and to operate, that's important. That's really important. Just from a day-to-day perspective. And I think I would have reconsidered that. But we were so scared, given where the economy was, and we just really wanted to be so disciplined. But altogether, the outcome has been really solid so far. So
no matter what stage you are in your founder journey, founder self-care is incredibly important.
Yeah, I mean, I get told that a lot. I need to apply that a little bit more personally, I guess.
We're all learning.
Yeah,
we're all learning.
Yeah.
David, sure. It's been quite the pleasure.
Thank you. This is awesome. I appreciate being on.
One last thing, if there's anything for you to plug on your way out, where can people find you? Let the people know.
Nothing specific to plug, but you can check us out at nedhelps.com and see what we're all about. Would love to chat with folks. You could book time directly right off of our website. Happy to provide a demo if you're interested.
Thank you so much, David. We appreciate your time today.
Appreciate it.